Cell theory notes. This will be unit 2-1, page 3. We know now that cells are the basic unit of life. So anything that is considered a living organism is going to be made up of cells when you really zoom in and look at them individually. They are microscopic, meaning we have to use a microscope to see them. And if it is a living organism, it is made of cells, regardless if it is a prokaryote or a eukaryote. Okay, before we get into the cell theory parts, we're going to first talk about the important biologists that came up with the processes leading up to the development of the cell theory. Robert Hooke is the most important one in the beginning. In 1635, he invented the first microscope. He actually observed thin slices of cork from trees, and he noticed that small shapes he thought looked like Monk's chambers. He called them cells, so that's why we call the smallest living parts of our body cells. Anton von Leeuwenhoek came along 10 years later and improved the microscope. He was actually the first person to observe living cells. So Robert Hooke observed the dead cork, basically from a tree. Von Leeuwenhoek observed living cells. He got those cells from pond water, and actually that pond water, he looked at it through this microscope right here, and you can see in the picture he's holding it up to his eye and holding that against the light, and that's how he was able to see the pond water and observe the living cells inside that sample. "200 years later, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus inside cells, and that's what this circle is inside these cells. This became very important because it showed us how a eukaryotic cell, which would be cells that have a nucleus, is different in its structure from prokaryotic cells, such as bacteria. When we talk about this cell theory, there's three guys that get the credit for coming up with this cell theory: Matthias Schleiden, Theodor Schwann, and Rudolf Virchow. The cell theory consists of 3 parts. The first part is that all living things are made of one or more cells. They can be simple cell, which would be a unicellular, so made of one cell, or they can be like Ryan Reynolds here and made of many cells, which would be multicellular. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function of all organisms is number 2 of the cell theory. And number 3 is that cells arise from pre-existing cells. That means that I have to have one cell, and if I need more of that cell, let's say it's a skin cell, it needs to divide to make 2 cells. And then those 2 cells need to divide to make more cells. So cells have to come from pre-existing cells. They can't just come out of thin air. Last thing to remember is your levels of organization. You learned this back in 7th grade. Just to refresh your memory, cells make up tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs make up organ systems. And then multiple organ systems in the body make up organisms. All right, and that's the end of your notes. Make sure you glue them in on page 3 and you do your 2 questions and a summary in Cornell Notes style.